Hey, good morning, guys. Welcome to VA Fridays. I apologize, I haven't done one of these in a while, but I wanted to make sure the content was on point. Today's content is really talking about how you can verify you're working with a good loan officer versus a bad one, right? Just because sometimes you have a client that comes with a loan officer or a lending team already, and it's maybe not someone you've referred before or ever worked with, or already have a previous experience. Sometimes you're in a position where you want the client to get an idea or see that they're working with a bad loan officer and maybe get them to a much better one because of these questions that you're asking. Before I get right into it, I'm gonna do a quick dad joke. Dad joke today is why doesn't Marvel should be using the Hulk as for more advertising because he's a huge banner. Get it? Bruce Banner? Get it? All right, so getting right into it. So here's at least 5 questions you can ask your client as soon as they're pre-approved on what the loan officer walked through with them, because these questions are really important to figure out, that helps you out in regards to the client's timeline, the client's budget, what the client's needs are. Also, has the loan officer prepared them to be competitive in the marketplace? I relate, getting a pre-approval is a lot like getting the gear to play football. However, learning to play football allows you to win the game, right? So just because you get the football gear doesn't mean you're a football player. Hopefully that makes sense to a lot of you guys. The idea is that hopefully the loan officer has gone with your client and educated them on how to be competitive in the marketplace. Because it's more than just being able to get pre-approved, it's also how to use their finances so they know how to set themselves up for success and put their best foot forward when knowing what their financial boundaries are. So one of the first questions you want to ask your client, especially if they're working with a loan officer you're not familiar with or you don't know that loan officer's process, whether it's already a company you were not a huge fan of or just don't know this person at all, is mortgage payment timeline. One of the questions I walk through with my clients is when, especially with clients who are moving from out of state or are renting currently in the state, one of the questions I ask is, when do you want to be in the new house? Because that's also dependent on when they want to close. So for clients who are moving out of state, we ask about the timeline. Okay, especially who are PCSing on orders, military orders. They say they're going to be in the state in September, mid-September. So I explained to them that now our plan is to have you close early September so that you can just, when you get to the state, all you have to do is drive up to your new house. And then from there, we backwards engineer 30 days to close, puts us in the beginning of August, which means you want the whole entirety of July at least to shop, 4 weeks to shop essentially. Sometimes they get 2 months or 6 weeks, depending on when they start this process. If they're renting, we want to make sure when their lease ends. So that way they're not having a rent and a mortgage payment in the same month. So if their lease ends in June and they make their last payment in June, that means they have to put their 30-day notice in May. So if we know that timeline, we want to make sure that the first mortgage payment is June or later, which means if the first payment is in June, that means the soonest they can close is in April. That's an example. But if they close any later than that, then their first mortgage payment is put out later and later. So those are things that are really important to you as a real estate agent or realtor to understand. When you submit an offer, you understand the timeline to close, especially what the buyer's needs are. So there are some sellers out there that are willing to wait 60 days, 45 days, depending on what their timeline is. So the best thing you can do is understand your needs of your client to know that, and your law officer needs to be the one to be able to communicate that because they're in charge of the lending and how the first mortgage payment is. Not that you need to know what the timeline is, but they should know what the timeline is, and the loan officer should have been able to walk them through that. If they're not asking them that question, then you could be putting your client in a situation where they could have a mortgage payment and rent due at the same time, or if they're moving from out of state, they could be in a situation where they're having to rent a place if they're not closed in time, or they might be closing too soon before they actually end up moving in the state. So I always recommend clients, don't close too soon before you get to the state because your house is going to be uninhabited until you get to the state. So, week, 2 weeks is fine. More than a month is a little scary. Now, the next thing that you want your client to know, and from the loan officer, is their monthly budget. So one of the things that we do is that we pre-approve clients for as much as they can, right? Some clients that can afford an $800 million home, the payment for it doesn't necessarily they mean what they want to pay for that much. Also, there's a lot of clients out there that believe the pre-approval letter is a check, meaning that if they get $1 million or $800,000 pre-approval letter, that means they have to spend $800,000. No, it just means that this is how much they can buy, doesn't necessarily, or can afford, doesn't mean that's a check. So knowing their personal budget versus their lending limits are two important things. Because what this helps as an agent is that you can narrow down the search based on their budget. And I do educate my clients in regards to the monthly payment, how that, as long as their monthly payment on the mortgage stays below this, to include taxes, insurance, HOAs, I walk them through all of that, and then how that translates to a purchase price. Because just because you get a $400,000 pre-approval doesn't mean that's their limit. Also, there's a chance that a $425,000 house could be below their monthly payment limit. So it just depends on the situation. So for them to understand that those different aspects of how the payment can change, how each house is different, is going to be a really important key. It's not set at 400K, it's really set on the monthly payment. And the client needs to understand that budget and what their limits are, and knowing that they can adjust their budget based on their lending limits and their own personal preference. And also, again, we take this personal budget and we translate it to what a purchase price is, and it gives us a roundabout number. It's not an exact, because every 400,000 house is always going to be slightly different from house to house to house, especially when you have HOA. So but yeah, you want to ask your client, did your loan officer talk to you about your personal budget and your lending limit? Meaning, how much do you want to afford and how much you can afford, right? Doesn't mean they have to go to that max. So that's the main thing. So some lenders will just give the pre-approval. Well, pre-approval based on what the client asked for, right? So they'll put $400,000, and that's the pre-approval they get if they're good for it. That's what most loan officers do, and most lending companies do. The client needs to know their buying power, right? They need to know what they're capable of, and they need to know that, hey, maybe most times they do buy way less than what they're capable of. And those are two important aspects. Sometimes they want to go a little bit above because they found the right house. And that's up to them to decide on how much they want to pay. But as long as they know their lending limit, it's good to go. And the key thing is, some of them may not have any idea what a $400,000 or $500,000 payment would look like and how it impacts their personal budget. So what you don't want is a client buying a house and they don't realize their budget is super tight at that monthly payment. So that's one of the things I talk through with my clients is that, hey, look, guys, this is kind of scary. This is a $3,000 mortgage payment. You guys make $6,000 a month. Your debts are pretty high. This is going to put you pretty marginal in your personal budget. Do you really want to do this? So having that checks and balances with the client and having that reality talk in regards to their personal budget is really important for that loan officer to go over with them. So make sure you're asking those questions. Next thing is funds to close. This is one of the most, I would say, out of all the questions, this is one of the most important questions to ask, because one of the things I do in the process of educating them is talking about closing costs. Now, when it comes to VA loans specifically, a lot of VA clients don't understand what funds to close means or what closing cost is. So we go through that discussion, but they know they don't need to bring in a down payment. They may not be fully familiar with closing costs. So I walk them through how closing cost works, what it is, and how much it could be, and then ways it could be paid, whether by the seller, by them. We can talk about strategies on how they can get their closing costs paid for by themselves or from the seller, ways they can source the closing costs, understanding what their budget is, leveraging their 401k or retirement accounts to pay for closing costs. Just options for them to know what they can do and why it's important for them to potentially pay their own closing costs to be super competitive in the marketplace. Because without this information, they're not going to fully understand why they may not get their offer accepted. And then in addition to that, you won't know how to be, you won't have the necessary tools as a realtor or real estate agent to understand how to be competitive and put the best foot forward when submitting an offer for your client. So one of the questions that you want to ask your client when they get pre-approved is, did your loan officer talk to you about how you can use your finances to be competitive in the marketplace when it comes to closing cost? right? So and obviously we can, sometimes clients are in a position where they have to get their closing costs paid for by the seller. That's the only way they buy the house. But if they have two, three, five, maybe seven, $8,000, depending on what state, what's really important is that they understand that they may have to use this in order to be competitive to get the house that they want. They can use this for earnest money or something like that, or a closing cost. So, and yeah, so this is where I was talking about. Yes, they can get the football gear to play football, but without training and understanding of use of that equipment, they're not going to be competitive, right? So that's where the funds to close is really important in this aspect, to make sure that they're working and they're understanding how they can use their finances to be competitive to buy a house, right? The more I tell the clients all the time that the more you can pay your own closing costs, the higher chance the seller will accept your offer. Now, the seller agrees to pay for all of it, then who cares, right? Then the client has those funds set aside already. They'll have more money than they expect, and we can move forward with that. We do talk about, potentially using the appraisal to help for closing costs, negotiating the purchase price. But I just tell them, be prepared, because you are at least having to come in with earnest money. So make sure you ask questions in regards relating to that closing cost piece, because us as the loan officer, we're the ones verifying their finances and knowing what they're capable of doing. They talk to us about what they're comfortable doing, and then we transfer that information to you so that you know how to advocate for them and on the best of their behalf. The other one is down payment. Not most VA clients won't bring in a down payment. It's not necessary, but sometimes if they I have a situation where clients are selling a house and wanting to put the money toward the new house, or they just saved up a bunch of money. If that's the case, I will educate them on how they can use this potential down payment to be competitive. And if the appraisal comes back at a value, guess what? We don't need anymore. We don't need the down payment. So, but I do educate them, like what down payment is effective in regards to their payment, and some other options that may be more impactful to lower their payment. So the question you can ask is, did your loan officer talk about strategies and how to lower your payment between down payment and buying points? Because you can buy points to lower your payment, and that's actually 2 to 3 times more effective and cheaper. However, buying points doesn't go toward the equity home like the down payment does. So that's kind of the pros and cons here. But your client needs to understand that they have the ability to pay points, and that could be rolled in the closing. That could be part of the closing costs that they ask for from the seller. The last one is items they need to work on. Sometimes there's extenuating circumstances. Sometimes we're waiting on something. Sometimes we're waiting on a document, whatever the situation is. The loan officer, at the very least, should be communicating to your client and you on some of the things that may prevent them from buying a house or closing on a house. For example, maybe we're waiting on an offer letter to come in, a contingent offer letter. Maybe we're waiting for some extra savings. Maybe we need to help. Maybe as they're shopping, I tell them that we need to bring in a strategy where we are working on improving your credit score. College degree in lieu of a offer letter. Maybe the college degree is one of the things that we need, so they need to graduate and be able to buy a new house. Maybe we're waiting for a new rank, hard orders for military moves, all sorts of stuff. It could be various things. So one of the things that you can ask is there anything outstanding that we need to get before you close on the house? Because that's going to impact your timeline. I would highly recommend, I probably would, as a realtor, real estate agent, I probably would recommend asking the loan officer directly about this. Sometimes the client may not answer the right way. So I probably ask them that. But all these questions, not only can you ask the client for it, you can always ask the loan officer for it. So this is how you know if the client is prepared to go shopping. And what's nice is that they would have heard it from loan officer, and they would have heard all this information from you as well. So it only helps reinforce that they've heard these aspects, the aspect of closing costs and being competitive, and all that stuff. Because if they're working with a loan officer that doesn't walk them through this stuff, the first time they're going to be hearing it is from you, which is unfortunate. So if they're hearing it from two different sources, the lending side and the real estate agent side, that only reinforces their ability to comprehend what they're getting themselves into. So that's what's really important. I think all these questions are the basic levels of what your client needs to understand And maybe hopefully by asking these questions, um, they start to realize like, why didn't my loan officer go into those details with me? Talk to and phrase it in a way that how it impacts them. Not so much how it impacts your job, but how it impacts them. Is if you don't know your closing costs, we won't know how to be competitive, and you have a really extremely low chance of getting your offer accepted. So we really need to know this information so that I can be advocating for you the best I can. Like what's your monthly budget? Sure, your pre-approval says 400K, but what is actual the limit? Is it the monthly payment? Is it your lending limit? Can you go slightly above if you needed to? All that stuff. And understanding that piece, because I've been noticing a lot of clients that have shifted over me from call center loan officers. I like to call them call center loan officers who are getting paid salary, aren't really there to like grow their business like I am. They're not really walking the client through this at all, by any means. So that's why I do these pre-approval meetings so that we can set a nice foundation of knowledge that they can get themselves into. So, but yeah, I'll try to like bring these questions at kind of forefront in the description, but these are really important questions that the client needs to be asked, and they need to be aware about. And so do you. You also need to be aware of their situation and how it implies to you. So that's how you could potentially start getting the conversation of them potentially looking at a different loan officer, who is going to provide them much better service, much better coaching and advisement, so that you're also looking out for their best interests, but also you're also protecting your reputation as best you can, because the client's going to have a much better experience of education, knowledge, and just overall efficiency in the process as well. So hopefully this helps, gives you guys some insight, some information that helps make your transaction a lot smoother. So let me know if you have any questions, but just so you know, these are the things I go through with every single client before they even go shopping. I meet with every single client through Zoom, talk to about all this stuff, and then I also introduce them to my pre-approval app. But otherwise, that's all I got for you guys today. Hopefully you guys have a great weekend. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Otherwise, nuke out.